The Mysterious Doorway of Maru by Mark Felder. In southern Peru, high in the Andes Mountains at 12,800 feet, cut into the reddish-brown sandstone thousands of years ago, is a shallow, mysterious keyhole-shaped opening called the Doorway of Maru. The doorway has many legends surrounding it, including the stories that it is an active working portal that transports beings into and out of this world. The doorway can be found about a mile from the shores of Lake Titicaca, in a field where a sharp vertical outcropping of sandstone rises straight up out of the altiplano. This region is in the middle of nowhere. The local inhabitants are very poor farmers, and they farm the fields right in front of this doorway. They are afraid of this place and will not come near it at night when it becomes active. There are stories of children playing at the doorway and disappearing into it, never returning. Strange-looking beings dressed in unusual clothing have been reported walking in and out of the doorway for centuries, and sometimes they headed right towards Lake Titicaca, only to disappear into the darkness. Last August, I was with a small group of 7 exploring ancient sites and temple ruins in Bolivia and southern Peru, in the legendary southern region of Lake Titicaca, where we planned to stop in at the doorway one evening where some of us would attempt to activate it. Our tour guide, Jerry Wills, had gone through the doorway about 10 years earlier. His experience there was incredible. He also had such respect for the doorway that he did not want to go through it again. Jerry had met an old local shaman named Pedro, who told him about the doorway and how to activate it. Pedro told Jerry that the doorway is activated at night, and that he must kneel in it, place his forehead in a special recess in the back side of the opening. Then, placing his hands on either side, he was to chant 3 tones. The sound from these tones resonates in the cavity which activates it. Pedro said that one must have a clear idea of their destination, and they would go there instantly. When the 3 tones are done correctly, the user will suddenly experience the feeling of falling forward. That can be very unsettling, as there will be no way to brace yourself once this happens. When Jerry did this the first time, in front of several witnesses, he shimmered and faded from view. About 1.5 minutes later, he reappeared, shimmering. For him, his journey seemed to last many hours, and took him to an incredible place beyond this universe. His journey back was not so smooth, and he was stuck behind the doorway, unable to find a way out. He was in a small dark cavity behind the doorway, and could see out one side. He could see Lake Titicaca in the distance, yet the opening was solid and would not yield. He found it difficult to breathe, and as he felt around with his hands, he realized that there was an opening carved into the wall that was just like the opening on the other side. He found the depression where his forehead was to go, and he knelt down in the opening and started chanting the tones. Moments later, he was on the outside of the doorway. We were planning on going to the doorway near the end of the leg of this tour. Finally, the day came when we would activate the doorway. I was with a group of 8, 1 local guide, the tour operators, Jerry and Kathy Wells, and 5 others. Out of the group, initially only 3 of us were planning on accessing the doorway. The doorway becomes active after dark. For some reason, light seems to diminish or even stop it from working, so we planned to use it in the dark. We arrived by our small private bus about an hour before dark. We parked in a field and walked across the field to the doorway, where we explored the area and got familiar with the site. At dusk, we made our plans, went over the 3 tones needed to activate the door, and then the contingency plans, in case someone went through but didn't return in a reasonable amount of time. If someone didn't return, we were going to leave rocks near the doorway, 1 for each hour we waited. That way, if the person returned and no one was there, they would know how long we waited before we left. We decided we'd wait at least 3 hours before leaving. Supposedly, we thought that if one went through, they would return on this side's time frame within a minute or 2, even though it may have seemed much longer on the other side. The fact is, we knew very little about how it works, what actually happens, and whether or not one could return, depending on what their experience was after passing through. All we had to go on was Jerry's experience from 10 years ago when he went through, and he was not planning on trying again. We were all going to stay about 40 feet back from the doorway while someone was using it. There was an area with large rocks on which to sit, watch, and listen. We would wait until total darkness, use absolutely no lights, and just let things play out as they will. Kathy was going to shoot video with a night vision camera of each of us after our turn at the doorway. This video will be available on the net sometime in the future. We all gave our word not to reveal the 3 tones to anyone, and then agreed to a disclaimer of liability in case anything happened. This was all recorded on video as well. Then we went over the 3 tones several times, including Jerry's account of how he got stuck in the doorway and how he was able to get out. Meanwhile, darkness came swiftly. Along with the darkness came a perfectly clear sky and stars, but no moon. There was a drastic drop in temperature as well. We were expecting it to drop to just below freezing. Then a cold wind started to blow through. The entire group fell uncannily silent as we pondered what we were actually going to attempt, and the uncertainty of what was waiting for each of us. During this, energy started pouring out of the doorway. The outer edge of it began glowing a very soft whitish green. The interior of it went exceptionally black. The energy was coming out in waves, literally, as if we were standing neck-deep in ocean surf. It became difficult to keep our balance, and we stumbled about in the darkness on the rocks and uneven ground. Even sitting down, which helped provide stability, didn't alleviate the strong push-pull of the doorway's energy. Our eyes adjusted to the starlight, and it was possible to just barely see enough to get around. The air was so cold and crisp. Even the tiniest sounds were easy to hear from great distances, as there was a highway about a quarter of a mile away, which ran miles farther, and long before headlights were detected miles away, we could clearly hear the trucks. Finally, it was time for someone to activate the doorway. I volunteered to go first, much to the relief of the other 2 guys. Jerry came up to me, offered his support and well wishes for safe journey. Then the others did the same, and I stumbled off to the doorway in the blackness. I had my backpack with me. In it were my 35mm camera, a flashlight, my journal, and a digital voice recorder. I was going to try to document my journey as well as possible. Photos, if they worked, would be awesome. Recorded sounds or conversations would be priceless. And lastly, journal notes would be an excellent resource for recalling details later. The access to the doorway is up a 4-foot steeply rolling ledge of sandstone which runs parallel to its face. The ledge then flattens out and becomes a rather narrow 1.5 feet wide. There are loose rocks scattered all over the area below the ledge, making walking a bit tricky. I found the ledge and crawled up. There, just inches in front of the black portal, I stopped. The energy was pouring out of the opening in huge waves. It was difficult to stand up on the ledge and keep my balance. I steadied myself on the opening, took one last look up at the incredible starry sky, and knelt down on the stony sill. The group behind me stopped talking. The cold wind stopped blowing. Utter silence closed in on me. I found with my hand the indentation where my forehead was to go. The smell of wachuma was strong, as someone must have splashed it on the inner portions of the door from some previous ceremony. Also, there was virtually no air to breathe. It was as if I was in a vacuum. I struggled to inhale, to fill my lungs. So I leaned back, my head out of the opening, and I could breathe. And back inside, no air. It wasn't my body's position preventing me from breathing. It was my location. I leaned back, sucked in a lungful of air, placed my head in the pocket, and started the first tone. Meanwhile, the air temperature started dropping rapidly. I adjusted the tone to get the maximum resonance, as this was the key. Quickly, I was out of breath and not wanting to move. I struggled to suck in more air, and started the second tone. I chanted this one a bit quicker. The doorway began to pulse slowly. sucking me in and pushing me out as if it were breathing in long, deep breaths. I concentrated on making the tones the best I could, repeating the first two, adjusting them intuitively. Meanwhile, my knees were very uncomfortable, without padding on the rough rock sill, and I was having a very difficult time breathing and making the tones. This was not as easy as I was hoping it would be. My mind was grokking the intense reality of what I was attempting to do. I was trying to pass through a portal made of stone in total darkness, alone, without any real preparations for such a journey, thousands of miles away from home, in a strange country, high up in the mountains, with a tiny group of newly made friends watching. This may very well be my last moments in this world. My thoughts then were of the beings that must have come through this very spot from other worlds, and of those who chose to exit from here, and the thoughts of uncertainty and the unknown that they too must have had. There was only one story of anyone ever returning from going through from this side. That person was Jerry, who fortunately was there watching. Not that he could do anything if I encountered a situation, but he was there, just the same. I was now completely on my own. No one could help me if I were to have problems. No one would know where I went or what happened to me or why if I didn't return. I had to trust completely in myself with no reservations, trust in my knowledge and trust the universe. I firmly fixed my destination in my mind and chanted the first two tones again, and followed immediately with the third. Everything started moving in all directions at once. The stone surface was undulating under my hands. I seemed to be moving in all directions at once. I moved into and out of the doorway, but kept ending up right back at the opening. My eyes had been closed the entire time, as there was nothing to see anyways. My knees were aching as there was no padding to protect them from the hard, rough stone beneath. I was unable to get a decent breath of air. I continued to chant the tones, adjusting them each time for what felt best. After about 10 minutes, I stopped. I had not passed through. I needed to regroup my thoughts, get some air, and rest my knees. I would try again after the others tried it. I stood up in the blackness, shuffling and feeling with my feet for the edge of the ledge, and slowly slid my way down and worked my way back to the group. They surrounded me asking questions. Did I go through? How do I feel? What happened? I told them what happened and that I was going to try again shortly. They told me that I seemed to disappear, that I went silent for a minute or so, and then they could hear me again. They thought I had passed through. They asked again if I was sure I didn't pass through. From my perspective, I hadn't. From theirs, I had disappeared for a minute or so. They said that there were lights and glowing coming from the doorway, but I was hard to see. Kathy was filming me up close as they asked questions. The IR camera has a short sight zone, so she couldn't film me at the doorway from her position at the waiting area, and we didn't want anyone too close to the doorway when someone else was using it. We don't know what would happen, but felt it would interfere with or most likely distract the person using it. I found a boulder to sit on. My legs were weak. I was still trying to get my breath, and the energy from the doorway was even more powerful now. I felt as if I had been running a great distance and was rather disorientated. I sat there. I could feel myself swaying back and forth with the waves of energy washing out from the portal. I asked if anyone else felt the same, and they all said yes. It was really rocking, literally. The energy seemed to push and pull about once every second or so. It was a strong and felt relaxing, but it was also strangely familiar. This energy felt quite natural and very, very large. Yet there was a strong, mysterious undercurrent to it, almost as if it was conscious. My mind was working overtime. Just what am I messing with here? I felt like I was tampering with the universe, trespassing on a portal I had no business messing with. This doorway is not a toy or a frivolous plaything. Not that I didn't already have a huge amount of respect for it, but now I really had some respect for it. The reality of it all was still sinking in. I was actually there, activating it with my mind and voice, and it was responding. This was a paradigm-shattering kind of mind expansion moment, and I was fully enjoying every boggling second of it. Solid rock just doesn't normally move around like that. Ray was next to volunteer to try the door. We all gave him encouragement and watched his black figure work its way up to the door in the faint starlight. He disappeared from sight at the opening, but we could hear him quite well. Every shuffle, every breath. The stone wall and cavity acted like a megaphone, amplifying the sounds and aiming them right back to us. After a few minutes, he started to chant. We listened intently to every sound. I strained my eyes looking for any movement, any sign of lights, or anything at all. Ray chanted the tones and paused, chanted again and paused. He shuffled about, and clearly he was struggling for air, just as I had. "I can hardly breathe," he announced to us, and after a moment started the chants again. Then suddenly there was absolute silence. I couldn't hear him breathing or shuffling, nothing at all. There was a faint glow around the opening, very softly. The entire face of the rock wall had a slight glow about it too now, but the keyhole-shaped cavity was completely black. We all seemed to be holding our breath, straining to hear the slightest sound coming from the stone wall. Then after about half a minute, the tones started again, and we could hear Ray breathing and moving. He chanted several times more, and then he started back down towards us. When he reached us, we all started with the questions. Kathy was working the camera. Ray's account was somewhat like mine. I don't recall many of the details of what he said, but the video of all our accounts will be posted on the net sometime soon. He was unable to pass through, yet related an amazing experience. Ethan was next. We gave him encouragement and wished him an excellent journey. He picked his way up to the doorway and he disappeared into its darkness as he positioned himself in the opening. He started chanting the tones, and after a few minutes there was a repeat of the short period of eerie silence while he was chanting. He too reported that he could barely breathe in the opening. After a short time he returned to the group. He said he didn't pass through, but also had an amazing experience. Again, I don't recall the details of his story accurate enough to relate them here. I was about to go to the doorway again, but then Klaus decided he would try it. For us, his time at the doorway was the same as the others, but he reported that the doorway told him he was not ready. It would not let him pass. He was very disappointed and sat on the rocks, slipping into a deep meditation. Our local guide, Henry, who was traveling with us on this portion of the journey, went up, and he too seemed to go silent for some moments. And then he too reported some amazing visions, but felt he didn't pass through. 5 of us had now tried the doorway, and everyone reported having trouble breathing in the opening, as if there was no air in there. The chants were extremely difficult to do without air, and I felt that there was a primary reason I was unable to pass through. Getting a good resonance with the tones and no air to make them was quite a challenge. One of the guys attached a white cloth to the backside of my backpack so they could see me better in the starlight. I headed up to the doorway again. This time I was determined to go through. The air had become much colder, yet the wall of stone was warm to the touch. I positioned myself in the opening, tipped my head back to fill my lungs as best I could, and started the first tone. The waves of energy coming from the opening rapidly increased in their intensity. Then I made the second tone. The rock face started to undulate rapidly under my hands. I could feel that I was being pulled in. It felt as if I had traveled inwards about 3 feet, and then as the energy pulsed, I was pushed swiftly right back out, then pulled back in 3 feet, and quickly pushed all the way back out. I made the third tone. Instantly I was pulled right through the stone way inside, much further than before, but I had run out of breath and struggled to inhale. I felt that I was so close, just a little more tone, a little more resonance with a little more power. I strained to make the tone louder, more forceful, but I lacked the air to do it. I paused there, inside the stone mountain. I was thinking about what Jerry had related in his story of going through the doorway, and how he got stuck on the other side. He could see through the wall as if it were a clear glass partition. He could see his wife Kathy and Lake Titicaca in the distance, but he was trapped in a dark place with a doorway that he had found with his hands cut into the wall, just like this outer side had. He positioned himself in the doorway and started to make the tones. He had a lot of difficulty breathing, finding enough air to make the tones to hopefully get back out. He became greatly concerned about not getting out, but finally was successful. No one had prepared him for this situation, so he had to figure it out himself. Would I encounter the same situation? Now I was getting concerned. If I did barely manage to get through, could I find enough breath to make the tones and get back out? I filled my lungs the best I could and started the first tone again. Instantly I was pushed way out from the opening and pulled right back in. Obviously that wasn't the right thing to have done. I continued with the tones, but could not get as far back into the doorway as I had been. I was unable to generate any decent resonance. The doorway's energy had changed somehow. I chanted the tones several more times, but all I did was get pulled in and out. It seemed as if I were there for 10 minutes. I stopped and went back to the group. I would try again after regrouping my thoughts. The shortness of breath in the opening was becoming a tough thing to overcome. Ethan, who had gone back to the bus for something, said that from his vantage point, while I was in the doorway chanting, the entire wall had lit up, and so did the area directly in front of it. The others told me they could make out the white cloth on my back. They saw the cloth disappear for a minute, and then they saw me back out of the doorway, halfway to where they were. They were 40 feet away, and quickly go right back in again. They said it happened much too quickly for me to have been able to do that in the dark, especially backwards. I was exceptionally woozy from the lack of air and the massive amounts of energy the doorway was putting out. I needed to rethink my method of activating the doorway and grok the reality of all this. What was really foremost on my mind was that I was actively trying to remove myself from this physical reality and from the earth itself. It was kind of heady, surreal stuff to deal with. It was time for the others to try again. We had a long night ahead of us yet, and things were just starting to get interesting. Ray and Ethan tried it again with interesting experiences. Then Klaus tried it. We all wished him an exciting journey as he worked his way past us through the darkness and up the ledge to the opening. We could barely see him under the starlight as he knelt down. We could hear his clothing rustling, his feet shifting on the sandstone ledge, and his labored breathing. Then he started chanting. He went through the 3 tones and paused, then started again. During his 3rd tone, everything went eerily silent. The energy pouring out the doorway went off the charts. Little lights danced around the doorway as its edges glowed. We waited about a minute, and then from the blackness of the doorway he murmured, "Where am I?" We could hear him moving about on the ledge, and we all quickly went over to him. Klaus was coming down off the ledge and seemed to be very disorientated. We steadied him and Kathy was foaming. We asked if he was okay. He said he went through. He went through the doorway. He told us how he was flying over the earth. Down below he could see people farming the land. All the people and animals were living with the land in total peace and harmony. It was so beautiful and peaceful. He said it was daylight there, and didn't know what the time frame was. He said he felt like he was gone for quite a while. We helped him back to the waiting area. Finally, success, someone had gone through. He didn't seem to have any trouble returning. He just reappeared through the doorway. He sat on a boulder and Henry the guide went up to try it. He didn't go through, but reported some interesting things that happened. We saw red lights and some flashes of white light while he was chanting. Now it was my turn again. The air was very cold now and short gusts of wind whipped through the area. I was staring up into the sky intently. The amount of stars I could see was breathtaking. I could see the Milky Way in the large darker area right next to it. The guys wished me a safe journey, and I went slowly back up the ledge and stood in front of the black opening. I took another long look up at the night sky. I was thinking that so many beings must have come and gone through this door, and the first or last thing that many had seen on this side was that sky and all those brilliant stars. I was standing in the exact spot they all had stood, and could not help but wonder what would happen if a traveler came through while I was standing there, blocking his way as he slid out the opening, bumping into me. Who would be startled more? I hesitated, kneeling down as I reached inside and felt around, just in case someone actually was in there. I was relieved to find it was empty. My knees protested as I knelt on the rough stone sill. I felt for the depression where I would place my forehead and got positioned. Again my thoughts went to all those who have passed through this place before me. Their foreheads were pressed in the exact same spot mine was. I wondered what they must have been thinking as they moved through this portal. The waves of pulsing energy pouring out of the doorway were very strong and disorienting. I started my chanting. With the first tone, I felt myself swiftly move way inside. With the second tone, I was moving back out, and on the third tone, I moved very quickly deep into the wall. I was out of breath, and finding more wasn't working very well. Then suddenly I could see through the stone. Before me was a cavern. It was dark except for where I was looking. The cavern illuminated wherever my eyes went. It was as if my eyes were spotlights. 20 feet down below, in front of me, were rows and rows of these incredible statues. They seemed to be made of stone and were life-sized. All were warriors, holding spears and bows. They were dark brown, the same color as all the earth and stone in that area. As I looked back into the cave, the rows of warriors went back as far as I could see. There were hundreds or more of them. The cavern seemed to be 60 to 80 feet across and was filled wall to wall with the statues. I was on a ledge, kneeling, in a small cavity that opened to the cavern below me. The air was cold and crisp. I was fully aware of being in my physical body, right there. There were no sounds other than that of my clothes as I shuffled around and my breathing. All my physical and inner senses told me I was physically there in that cavern. Needless to say, I was in awe at the sight below me, and that I was there in the cavern. My vision was crystal clear, the details super sharp. The statues were highly detailed and lifelike, except for the color. They were evenly spaced about 2 feet apart. All of them were facing forward in my direction and at attention. I had a knowing that these warriors, once made, have been in that dark cave for thousands of years, and very few beings have ever seen them. It seemed like I was there for 10 to 20 minutes. It was hard to tell, as the sense of passing time was different. Then I felt myself move backwards out to the face of the portal. I felt very privileged that the doorway had revealed something so rare and special to me. I thanked the portal for the gift, and knowing that I wouldn't be passing through this time, I went back to the group to prepare for another attempt. Kathy filmed me, telling them what occurred. Ray went up to the doorway. We waited quietly. The tone started, and after about 10 minutes he came back. During his chanting there was the same eerie silence for about half a minute. He said he didn't go through, but had seen a fantastic sight. It was a crystal, about 5 feet into the rock. He described it as an incredible sight, details of which I'll get to later. Ethan tried the door. I don't recall what happened, but he didn't go through. Then Jerry said he was going. This was a bit of a surprise, as he was so apprehensive about it before. He walked up to the doorway, and in the starlight we could see the faint glow of his yellow coat. We still could hear every shuffle, every breath as he got positioned in the opening. The doorway was so black that he was already out of sight. He started the tones. On the second round of tones, things went silent again. The doorway had a glow about its edges. The energy was really rocking now, more than before, and I felt very woozy just sitting on the boulder 40 feet away. We waited for about a minute, and then there was a loud rustling sound coming from the doorway. Kathy called out Jerry's name several times, and then he answered. He said he had gone through. We all went to the doorway to help him down. He was sitting on the ledge with his back in the opening. He said there was a very loud cellophane sound ringing in his ears, so he couldn't hear us at first, and that he had to push his way out of the stone. Kathy filmed his story, and then encouraged him to try it again. Jerry was reluctant to do it right away. Then someone had the idea for all of us to try the door at the same time. 5 of us agreed to try it. Jerry was in the doorway, I was standing in the left pillar, 2 others sat with their backs to the doorway, right next to it, and Ethan stood at the right pillar. We all faced out except Jerry, and all started chanting the tones at the same time. We tried it several times, but with no results. Then we all faced the doorway and tried it again. Still nothing. Because of how cold it had become, Jeff had already gone back to the bus to warm up. Klaus and Ray were too cold to continue, so they went to the bus as well. I decided to try again. This would be my 5th try at the doorway. I got into the position and noticed how the energy coming out of it had stopped. The stone felt just like ordinary stone. There was plenty of air to breathe inside. Things had drastically changed. I started the tones, but could not get any resonance whatsoever. I kept at it, adjusting my tones, but still no resonance. The doorway had shut down. Disappointed, I worked my way back to the remaining group. Kathy filmed me. I told them the doorway had shut down, and this surprised everyone. Then Ethan went up to the doorway and started the tones. After a few minutes he came back and said the doorway was not working. It had shut down. We couldn't feel the strong energy pulsing out in waves as before. I wasn't giving up, though. The others seemed ready to call it a night and go back to the hotel. They were cold, but I wanted one more shot at it. I told them I was going to try it again. Henry, the local guide, came up to me and tried to convince me to go. He was cold and wanted to warm up on the bus. I told him I was going again and worked my way back to the doorway. I knew this was most likely my last try at it. The doorway had shut down, and I wanted to know for sure that I had done everything I could to go through. The thought of stopping just because someone else was cold didn't make any sense to me. They could go back to the bus. I was cold too, but so what? Being cold is temporary, but this experience would last me a lifetime. I stood on the ledge in front of the opening, taking in all the sensations of that place. I gazed out at the awesome black sky, with the billions of stars shimmering in it, making me feel so small. I felt the icy cold crisp air blowing on my skin, and inhaled as deeply as I could. I turned to face the opening, and knelt down inside. I placed my hands on the back wall, and asked the doorway and the universe to allow me something special to experience. I still had my original destination in mind. The pungent odor of Rachuma, which saturated the doorway, swirled around in the chilling breeze. I placed my forehead into the cavity and waited for a moment, then started the tones. As I started the first tone, I could feel waves of energy surging out and all around me. I repeated the first tone, and the energy built. The heady smell of Rachuma stung my nose. My breath became short, and I started the second tone. I could feel myself being pulled in and out of the doorway in a slow pulsing motion. I repeated the first 2 tones, and then hit the third. My entire face sunk several inches into the stone, while the rest of me stayed on the outside. Instantly I could see a brilliant light in front of me. I was looking through the stone, and about 5 feet in total blackness, like a void, was a large, beautiful, brilliant crystal. It was multifaceted, about 18 inches high, and almost the same in diameter. There was a brilliant, pure white light glowing from within, which illuminated its multiple facets. The light was rapidly bouncing all around the interior of the crystal. The crystal was slowly rotating. Bright blue streams of energy radiated outward, like a Tesla coil, in all directions, yet they illuminated nothing. The crystal was in a complete void. I watched the crystal for what seemed like 5 minutes. It was beyond any description I can find words for, as it wasn't just a visual experience. This crystal went right through me in ways I cannot describe. I have been trying to find the words for this and still can't. It was an indescribable intelligence, much different from my own, and penetrated every cell of my body, every thought in my mind. The rock I was looking through suddenly closed up. I could tell that the doorway was telling me I was done for that night. I got up and went back down to the group. Kathy filmed me for the last time. We went back to the bus, this time with flashlights to light the way. On the ride back to the hotel, Ray, who also had seen a crystal, and I compared notes on the crystals we both saw. The details were exactly the same, right down to every tiny detail we could remember. I asked him what his destination had been if he went through, and he said he wanted to see God. I told him I wanted to see my greater self. He was still blown away with this experience with the crystal, and so am I. For clarification, neither I nor anyone in our group was using wachuma, alcohol, or any other mind-altering substance while at the doorway. The wachuma I smelled had been applied by someone else prior to our arrival. The video that Kathy shot of us at the doorway has been edited into a half-hour documentary and is freely available at https://xpeditionstv.com, episode 3. All photography in the magazine, the article, Mark Felder. I highly suggest for anyone to go to the site where Wisp Magazine is. I will put it down in the links below. The layout is excellent for this article, many great pictures, and there's many other magazines in there that are good reads too.